It would be fair to say that I grew up different than most kids. The first movie I remember watching was Predator, whereas most kids at my age were obsessed with Lion King or any other of the Disney animated films. From a young age, I was obsessed with movies like Terminator, Friday the 13th, and most notably, Alien. Needless to say, I was a horror junkie, with films like Alien and The Thing being amongst my favorites. So, you would think being a young whippersnapper like that, a game like Dead Space would have been a gift from the gaming god. But I never played it back then. That's right. Until this remake, I have never played Dead Space. Looking back, I can't think of a particular reason for this either. I didn't avoid it. It just didn't end up on my radar somehow. Then when Motive Studio announced their remake, I decided to hold off, thinking this would be the ideal way to play the game. And play the game, I did. So, without further ado, I present to you a fresh-eyed reaction to the Dead Space remake from someone who never played the original. I dove into this game with a fair bit of excitement but minimal expectations. I love this genre, but from watching other people play this game, I found it looked stiff. Playthroughs before release appeared too easy, and coming off of the awful Callisto Protocol, which is heavily inspired by this, I set my bar low. I will say I was immediately happily proven wrong in terms of performance. This game is super smooth, fluid, and the combat actually felt really fucking good. The guns and melee felt like they had an appropriate amount of weight behind them, though the melee is rather useless aside from the boot and loot stomp. I was pleasantly surprised by the weapon variety here. I previously had only ever been exposed to the plasma cutter, but there is a lot of different guns here, ranging in ability and power. I will say in games like this, I usually find my primary 4 weapons and then kind of just forget the rest of them. But the game felt hellbent on making me mix it up. I would go through so many areas only looting ammunition for the weapons I didn't like. It felt like the game wanted me to try them. Though I didn't care for a couple of them and only used them when the game made me, I will say the force gun is a perfect repellent for hordes of necromorphs. Controversial opinion time. While the game does look great, I really don't feel like it looks next gen, which isn't a diss to this game in particular, as I found very few next gen games truly look next gen so far. Some of the textures are still sort of dated looking, while some are perfect, but the lighting here is what really stands out. This remake has the best horror lighting since Alien Isolation, which is one of my other favorite games. Much like my all-time favorites, Dead Space Remake also managed to scare the living shit out of me more than a couple of times. Most of these were early on, of course. Naturally, as you upgrade, the enemies become less scary. However, the pacing here is much better than something like Resident Evil 7, that just felt tonally uneven. The progression and build-up to it being a total shooter in the end feels much more earned and gradual. By the time the finale comes around, I felt so personally victimized by these things, I just wanted to plow through them anyway. Speaking of these things, another huge surprise for me was the variety of enemy types. Some, of course, are your typical spitters or exploding enemies we're used to in these kind of games, while some were totally brand new and often annoying, like these tentacle wall fuckers. I hate these guys so much. Where the game really shined for me, though, in terms of tensity, was from the Hunter boss fights. If I remember correctly, there's only 2, and both times are absolutely terrifying. Again, I got mad Alien Isolation vibes, but almost worse, as I couldn't hide from this guy like I could the Xenomorph. He always knew where I was and was just determined to eat my ass. Wait, I mean, never mind. Forget that last part. Game brought me genuine fear and frustration, as horror games do, not wanting to go through the next door or trigger the next section because I just know what is coming. While the Hunter boss battle I found very fun and very unique, I did not feel the same about the Leviathan or final boss fight. I was only playing on medium difficulty, but often found the game doesn't set you up properly for these fights. I know it's a cliche handout, but I think I've just become so used to finding massive loot areas before a boss fight, and Dead Space doesn't do that. There were multiple times that I died because I didn't have nearly enough resources to fight, which is another thing. Maybe this was just my playthrough, but I found at the midpoint of the game, all that I could loot was credits. I never found ammo and health. There were multiple sections I just barely survived due to this, which is maybe the point, but I feel like if I bumped up the difficulty, I would get destroyed. I mean, I could be the problem here. Maybe I am just terrible. Who knows? But nonetheless, I found these boss fights more gamey and easier by structure, if that makes sense. Like, if I had resources, actually staying alive isn't challenging. The game relies heavily on a wait a moment for the enemy to expose his weak spot and then blast it technique. The upgrade system in this game I honestly found sort of useless. I know most people will disagree, but the capacity upgrades only give you 1 or 2 extra shots for some guns, and the damage upgrades don't seem to matter at all, because every time you upgrade, the enemies get tougher anyway. It felt like no matter how much I progressed or how much I upgraded the plasma cutter, it always took the same amount of shots to take enemies down. In terms of story, this game isn't anything to write home about. It isn't bad by any means, just cliche. It is a sci-fi horror story as old as time, even when this game was released. I will say, however, when this game was released, it was mainly competing with horror movies, so in that aspect it does stand out as a video game. The world and characters are interesting enough to carry you through, but not enough to remember. Though I'll admit, I did not expect that final betrayal. Most of it was predictable and silly. Like, no matter how many monsters Hammond sees, he still doesn't understand what happened to his friend. He still yells out, "What the hell is that?" all the time. There are some weird moments like that sprinkled throughout the game. A lot of the story is predictable, but it's acted well enough. I, like nobody else, actually like Isaac Clarke in this version of the game. I know there was a ton of controversy about his face and the way he speaks, but making him just an average Joe actually worked quite well for me. He wasn't like a hardened space marine or a Master Chief style tough guy, just a blue-collar worker in the wrong place using his wits to survive. I really liked that aspect. He was much better than like Josh Duhamel's character in Callisto. By the time the game wrapped up, I was so satisfied and overwhelmed. I could see why everybody loved this game so much, but also going in without nostalgia goggles, I had some issues. I personally find the game a bit long for what it is. Eventually the missions got a little repetitive for me. Go into a new section of the ship, find and trigger 5 different things, whether it be power cells or these lifelong smokers. This could simply be because I'm more used to the shorter runtimes of like the Resident Evil remake, but it did wear thin after a while. But with the growing challenges and the intensity of combat, I also felt extremely satisfied when the credits rolled. So, as someone who never touched this franchise before the remake, I can now say I am a fan. I fully understand why people love this series now, and find myself very eager for a remake of the sequel. I will definitely be playing that, as I have been led to believe it's even better than this one. For now, though, after I beat Hogwarts Legacy and Atomic Heart, I am just excited to replay this in the New Game Plus mode. Like always, guys, thanks for clicking on my face. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Did you love the Dead Space remake? Do you think I'm a tool for not playing it yet? Let me know in the comments below. Like always, if you enjoy this content, maybe like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Any help is appreciated. Thanks, guys.